Hi, how are you guys? Hope you're ready for chapter 12. So, now that we already understood a little bit about the bacteria, we are ready to talk about the eukaryotes. So, bacteria and archaea are our prokaryotes, and now we're going to talk about eukaryotes. Are we going to talk about all the eukaryotes? No, we're going to talk about the ones that are more relevant to the health field and that are microscopic, right? We're not going to talk about big eukaryotes. We're not going to talk here about plants. We're not going to talk about animals. We are not going to talk about some other protists that don't really cause disease like algae and slime molds. We're not really talking about those. We're just focusing more on the ones that can potentially cause human diseases. Sometimes we're going to mention some that don't, but most of the ones that we're highlighting cause some type of human pathogen. Okay? So if you look at our learning objectives list, you're going to see that we have here main features, for example, for fungi. So we're going to divide this chapter into fungi, protozoa, and helminths. And so our first video is about fungi, second about protozoa, third about helminths. So when I say main features include structures, I'm going to talk about this, mechanisms of reproduction, and focus on some specific types of spores like conidiospore, sporangiospore, and zygospore. I'm not really asking you a question about the other types, okay? And I say info from table posted in course material. So this table in course material has, let's show the table before I talk about it. So this is the table, right? And I have, so here for fungi, I put the phyla here, and I said no need to memorize. And then I put the main features, of these phyla of fungi. So what are the main features? I'm saying here, if this spore that I'm mentioning is asexual or sexual, what type of spore is formed is the main thing that I am mentioning here, okay? And then the name of some genera or some species that belong to each one of these phyla. And then we're just going to mention type of mycosis that each one of these fungi cause. So I am not talking about all the fungi that the chapter in the book mentions, but focusing on these ones. Okay? And we're not going to really go deep into what is going on with each one of these fungi, how the disease is, what are the symptoms. We're not focusing on that yet because we're going to talk about that when we talk about the diseases, okay? From chapter 21 forward. Same thing for protozoa. I have a table that is semi-complete, so you just need to complete the relevant features, diseases, and something here that I did not put for you. The helminths table is pretty much complete. I did it for you just to help you because I think helminths are the most complicated to understand. So I put everything in already there in the table. And there is a table about viruses. You don't really need to worry so much about it. This is for chapter 13, okay? Actually, it shouldn't even be here because they're not eukaryotes. But I do have a table about virus just for illustration. So let's talk about fungi. What is important about this kingdom of eukaryotes? So mycology is the name of the study of fungi. The same way as mycosis is the name of a disease, of diseases, right? A general term for diseases caused by a fungi. By fungi plural, fungus singular. Excuse me. They're all chemoheterotrophs. What does that mean again? They're kind of like us, where they don't make glucose. Most of them are aerobic and need oxygen. Some of them can ferment and be facultative anaerobic. So they don't make their own food. They don't do photosynthesis. They don't need light for the glucose metabolism. Okay? One super, I'm gonna write here for you, one super important feature of fungi is that they decompose organic matter. And you may be like, well, but that's just trash, something that is on the soil. Why would that be so important? That is the most important and the reason why we cannot live without fungi. They're in the soil, and whatever dies, plants, animal, people die and are buried or laying on the soil need to get decomposed. And a big part of this decomposition is made by fungi. Why do they need to be decomposed? Remember the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle. We don't get more carbon molecules than the ones we have in the planet. That's it. The ones we have, that's all we have. We don't get more. So we need to break things down to rebuild new things, and by things I mean molecules that are going to make organisms. Does it make sense why this is so important? I hope it does. So that's one of the main things about fungi. They can be sexual, and even the ones that we say they're asexual for most of their lives, even those at some point can have a sexual reproduction. What do I mean by sexual reproduction? Just to be clear here, you're like, what? I didn't know fungi had penis and vagina and they had sex. No, they don't. That's not sexual. Sexual in biology, you may have learned this before, but let's just recap. Mixture of genetic material from two different organisms from the same species. Okay? So same species of fungi, let's say I have here, they're the same species, but they have different sets of genes. They can mix their genetic material and have a little baby. And the baby is going to have genetic material from mom and dad. Even though they don't have a gender, they are not female and male, you still call that type of reproduction where genetic material from A and B are mixing sexual. Got it? What sexual is? So when you think about sex now, it's a totally different concept than you had before you learned biology, right? Okay. What is this? These are very important features of fungi when you compare to bacteria and you see the difference. Eukaryotic, bacteria prokaryotic. Cell membrane that are sterols embedded in their phospholipid bilayer, kind of like we have. We have cholesterol in our plasma membrane embedded. They have another type of esterol that is called ergosterol. My pen is great today. I'm so happy. Then you can see that my handwriting is still ugly, but at least I can write when the pen works. And then bacteria don't, right? So why do they have ergosterol in their cell membrane? Because they don't have, they need a firmer cell membrane because their cell wall is not made of peptidoglycan. It's not that hard. And cell membrane with ergosterol makes it more firm. They still have a cell wall that could be made of glucans, mannans, which are sugars, or chitin, which is a protein. Okay, usually you see chitin in cell wall of fungi. Who else has chitin? If you learn biology, is what makes the exoskeleton of insects and arthropods in general. Okay, spores. Do they have spores? They do, but that has nothing to do with the spores that we see in bacteria. Spores in bacteria are not for reproduction, the endospores, right? For spores for fungi are for reproduction, sexual or asexual. And I'm going to tell you more about this in a minute. Metabolism. The metabolism of fungi is limited to heterotrophic. They're aerobic, facultative, anaerobic, like we said. Bacteria can be from A through Z, right? They can be heterotrophic, autotrophic, aerobic, facultative, anaerobic, everything. Okay. You're like, but what are fungi? Are they the mold or they are the mushrooms? Oh, I forget to mention this. This here, not this. This is a big fungus, right? Look how big. Look at that person sitting under the fungus, right? So, is that a microbe? No, it's not. So why are we talking about that? Well, we're going to talk about the ones that are microbes, okay, that you can see under the microscope. The ones that are not microbe are the mushrooms. So mushrooms are not microbes. So we're not talking much about them. I'm just going to mention, okay? So the ones that are microbe are the molds and the yeast, okay? So molds are the ones, they look like a little plant, and the way they grow kind of looks like a plant growing, where, let me show you this picture. You see, this is like if this was the root of the plant, and then this is the stem, and these are the branches, you see? So what happens here? This is a spore, and the spore germinates a hyphae. The hyphae grows stems. Sometimes these hyphae have a septum. You see how this one is septated, is divided, and sometimes they're not septated. We're not going to really talk about which ones are septated, which are not, but that's part of the classification. And as we already talked about, the spores and the hyphae have cell wall, okay? So this grows, and then on the tip of this hyphae, you have what we call spores or reproductive spores. And what happens to these spores? These spores fall on the soil or whatever substrate that the fungus is growing on, just like a seed from a plant falls. So let's say this little spore is gonna come all the way here on the soil down here. So it fell here. And then what? And that is this. It's a new spore. Let me make another color now. So the new spore is going to grow a new hyphae. And that hyphae is going to grow and make a new fungus. Okay? And then this new fungus is going to have spores again, and that spore is going to grow somewhere and make another one. Okay? That's how they grow. Is this sexual or asexual? Well, do you see any dad here? Or you just see mommy spore growing from its own genetic material? Asexual. Okay? There's no daddy going on here. I'm going to show you when daddy is around. So here we were talking about hyphae, you know, the long little stems. The hyphae here are this little, you can even see sometimes, not even, it usually makes the growth on the naked eye kind of fluffy looking, like furry. And then when you look under the microscope, you can see these little lines here, which are the hyphae. And this is what we call conidiospore. It's a arrangement where the spores are. So I'm going to tell you more about how spores, what type of spores we have, okay? So the difference between mold and yeast is that, so I didn't tell you this here, molds like to grow at room temperature. What is room temperature? Room temperature is 25, around 25 degrees Celsius. Okay? Does that mean they don't like our body and they don't cause disease? It doesn't, because a lot of these fungi can be dimorphic, which means they're super well in the environment at 25 degrees. And if you inhale or ingest, but most of the times it's inhalation of these spores of this fungus, they can grow as yeast in your body. Why? Because yeast, which are the unicellular type or form of fungi, only one cell, they like to grow at 37 degrees, which is the human body temperature, right? Hope it makes sense. So fungi that are dimorphic are usually as mold in the environment and as yeast inside the body. It does not mean that you cannot find mold growing in an infection. There are some fungi that can grow as mold inside the body also, but it's not as common. Yeast can divide by budding or by fission. Okay, remember the budding? One cell makes a little baby here. Is that sexual or asexual? Where is dad? There's no dad. Asexual, okay? And that little baby will split from mom and one day become a mom. So it's different from fission, where one mom splits into two daughters that are the same cell size as the mom cell, okay, the mother cell. So this is budding. You see, there is one bud, another bud here coming from this parent cell. They don't call it mommy cell like me. And this is just an example of fungal dimorphism, where you have the yeast-like row, the single cells, and the mold-like row that can be identified by the presence of hyphae. Okay? Like I said, they can reproduce sexually or asexually. So I'm going to show you here some examples of spores that are asexual. So we have, the ones we're going to focus, right? Let's talk about the ones we're going to focus. Conidia, which is, they're always sexual here, right? What is the conidia? The conidia is it's common in Aspergillus, in Penicillium. They have a little stem, and then on the tip of the stem, you have these little spores making like a little chain. Okay, so it's a little chain of spores, like making a little pearl necklace on the tip of that little branch, which is the conidia. So you call this conidia, and these little spores, you call them conidiospores. Okay. The other type that I want you to know is the ascospore. That is not here. The ascospore is not that different from the sporangiospore. The difference is that they're both sac. I'm sorry. Ascospore is sexual. The one that is asexual is the sporangiospore. This is a sporangiospore. So you have a sporangium, which is what I'm circling here. And the sporangium is connected to the hypha. The hyphae that you have here is what they call sporangiophore. It's like the stem that holds that sac. So this is a sac. It's like a bag. And this sac contains this little tiny loose, now they're not like connected to each other. They're all loose inside the sac. Sporangiospores. And one day, this ruptures and all these spores fall in the environment, in the soil, and each one of them is going to give rise to a new fungus. Okay? So we talked about sporangiospore, we talked about conidiospores, and I don't really need you to know the other ones. But for example, you see how Candida, which is the yeast that we know that causes yeast infection in human, cause vaginal infection, thrush, which is a mouth infection that is common in babies, can form blastoconidia and chlamydocomidia. So we don't need to know that, but these are two different ways that they form spores, and they just receive a different name also because they belong to a different family. They're the anamorphs, which is a different family from the aspergillus, which is ascomycota. Okay, so there are all these phyla and all these different types of spores, and I'm just focusing on the ones that are in that table that I gave to you, which are here, from here: Conidia, sporangiospore, conidiospore that come from the conidia, sporangiospore, and now we're going to talk about the zygospore. Let me see if I have a picture of the zygospore. So what I'm trying to show you here is that to form a zygospore, you have two hyphae here, one hypha, two hypha, one hyphae, two hypha, and they kiss. And when they kiss, they form a gametangia, which is a gamete with genetic material from both mom and dad. Okay? When that happens, you form a 2N zygote. Okay? And that zygote grows, and that zygote, so let's say this zygote is now here, is going to create a new fungus. Just like an asexual spore. What's the difference here? This zygote came from a mom and a dad. Okay? When you have a asexual spore, it doesn't have a dad, right? It was just genetic material from one fungus. So this is here to show you that this is the asexual reproduction, but the same fungus can have sexual reproduction by gametangia, which is this. You see, one hyphae from one guy and another one from the other guy make a zygospore, and that zygospore falls somewhere in the soil and creates a new fungus, and that fungus was created by sexual reproduction. Okay? Hope this is clear. If you look in the book, there are nice pictures of zygospores. Other features of fungi that we didn't mention. They love acidic pH. They grow really well in high sugar or high salt concentration. That's why a lot of times in food, when you leave food out of the fridge, first you see fungi growing and then you will see bacteria, because fungi grow much easier in something that is not too wet or that has a lot of salt or a lot of sugar. Okay, they are resistant to osmotic pressure, to high osmotic pressure, to high amount of salts. That's why they also grow really well in wounds, because in the wound you don't have a lot of liquid available, and they're okay with that. And the pH of the skin is low. So they are good skin type of parasites. Okay? Another reason why they like the skin, there are some fungi that love to eat keratin. And we have a lot of keratin in the skin, right? They grow, like I said, in low moisture content or high solute content. And they can metabolize complex carbohydrates. And that makes them be able to live in different environments. For example, they can eat cellulose. They can eat different things like from trees, from parts of plants that died and that are on the soil. So they decompose all that, right? And that is important because then they can use anything as a nutrient, or most of the, available substances in the soil, and they break it down, which is that decomposition that we talked about. So all these are super important features of fungi. When you talk about fungi diseases, mycosis, fungi infection. A systemic mycosis is deep in the body in some internal organ. Subcutaneous is on the skin or right beneath the skin. Cutaneous is on the skin, affecting hair, skin, and nails. Superficial is when it's localized on the skin but not diffused. And opportunistic mycoses are fungi that are usually harmless and you can find them in your body, for example, candida. But one day, if your immune system is disequilibrated or your microbiota is not really functioning properly, they can overgrow and cause infection. Okay? So these are types. This table is from our book and it shows types of fungi and their phyla and features. So like I said, we're going to focus on the Rhizopus because the Rhizopus is a fungus that has sporangiospores, but also, I'm gonna write here, zygospores. Zygospore. Okay, so Rhizopus and mucor are both from the same group and they cause systemic mycosis. Rhizopus can be ingested because they like to grow in bread. You know that black mold that you see on bread and in strawberry, that's Rhizopus. Okay, and they can have asexual or sexual reproduction. Now we're going to talk about Aspergillus. Aspergillus causes a systemic lung disease. Aspergillus has conidia, right? Conidiospores. Blastomyces also has conidia and causes systemic disease. Histoplasma, we're going to talk about that later, also causes a systemic disease. It causes a disease that is called, it's a pulmonary disease called histoplasmosis. Now we're going to move here to Coccidioides immitis. This fungus also causes systemic mycosis. Candida, which we just talked about, which is our yeast. Yeast causes an yeast infection even though it's dimorphic and can cause a systemic, cutaneous, and mucocutaneous infection. And pneumocystis is nowadays the name of the species changed to Pneumocystis jirovecii, and it causes a lung infection very common to be seen in HIV patients or AIDS patients that develop AIDS, okay? Because the immune system is weak and this fungus that could be present in the microbiota of your body can overgrow and take over the lung and cause pneumonia. This fungus looks a little similar to a protozoa by the way that it grows because it forms cysts. So sometimes in the past they used to be confused with protozoa. And then the last one, the Basidiomycota group, I just want to mention that there is the Cryptococcus, which is an yeast that can be found also in bird feces. And if you inhale those spores from the bird feces, you can have a disease called cryptococcosis, which is a fatal meningitis. And Malassezia and Amanita, these two are mushrooms. These mushrooms can cause Malassezia cutaneous infection, Amanita toxic ingestion. Remember that fungus can also be really useful economically, like Saccharomyces cerevisiae can be used to make bread, wine, and also they're used as the host cell for the recombinant hepatitis B molecule. So the molecule from the hepatitis B virus is recombined or inserted into a yeast from the Saccharomyces cerevisiae species, and that's the vaccine. It's an yeast with a gene that codes for a protein that was in the hepatitis B viruses. And expressing the protein is going to make your body see it, and then you can attack it and learn how to recognize the virus if one day you get infected. Also important, taxomyces makes Taxol. And there are other ones. There is a virus that kills termites. There is another virus that is important to kill other fungus on crops, and so on. I will see you in the next video when we talk about protozoa. Bye.